I think I'd change my name. So it'll be, here's John. He's the new handyman.
Oh, I like it.
You're listening to the Occupational Philosophers with Simon Banks and John Rice.
Yeah. So shut up and I'll kick off. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Occupational Philosophers, a not-so-serious business podcast that each and every week mashes up the worlds of curiosity, creativity with a healthy sprinkling of philosophy thrown in. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and co-producer, John Rice, joining us from the UK. John, good morning to you. And what's caught your curious eye this week?
Hey, Simon, good morning to you. What's caught my curious eye this week is the story that always makes me chuckle. Museum bosses were left somewhat dismayed by the fact that a beer can art exhibit was mistaken for rubbish and chucked in the bin. And the artist, Alexander Lavey, had spent days meticulously painting some cans to make them look like the Belgian beer Jupiler in the corner of a glass lift at the said museum. A museum worker just picked them up and chucked them in the bin. And they all went into a bit of a panic. Thankfully, they found them. Sietse van Santen, the museum's director, said that the mistake was, in a way, testament to the effectiveness of Alexander Lavey's art. And he goes on to say, our art encourages visitors to see everyday objects in a new light. By displaying artworks in unexpected places, we amplify this experience and keep visitors on their toes. So there we go. I've been into many a museum. I've been staring at a fire extinguisher in the corner, thinking it was an installation, only to be moved on by some janitor. And I was just thinking about it. Always makes me laugh. I was just thinking, my gosh, in my student days, how much artwork I had lying around the flat was incredible. I could have opened it as a gallery and made a lot of money. There we go. How about you?
I like it.
How about you, Simon?
Well, that just reminds me of Tracy Emin's bed that she did in the Tate, possibly, 20, 25 years ago now. And the cleaner came in and made it. So her unmade bed, it was called. The cleaner came in and tied it all up and made it and went on her way. So, yeah, just repeating history. Well, what's caught my eye, John, is in the same space and probably a little bit meta. But I've spoke to you about this before, my unfinished abstract artwork, which has been going on for 20 years. And I exhibited this in the UK 20 years ago. I'm not sure if you came to that show. Probably not. Can't remember your support there.
I was too busy making artwork in the pub next door.
Yeah, in beer cans. Yeah, the navel fluff or something. So, so I thought, well, is there maybe a scientific reason behind this? Like how do you know when an abstract artwork's finished? And a fair bit of Googling, and it's sort of like, hey, the vibe, man, the vibe. So if you know, if it feels it's not finished, it's not finished. But then I realized there is something called CLT, which is called construal level theory, a psychological theory that has systematically characterized differences in abstract and concrete mindsets. In this study, we found that abstract art evokes a more abstract mindset than representational art, and CLT provides a useful new empirical approach to the analysis of cognitive states evoked by different levels of artistic abstraction. And that's when I tapped out. Yeah.
Great. I think the only person who might understand what you've just said is the guest that we've got on today's time. we have a guest episode.
Well, that's a nice, what do they call that in radio land? It's a
segue.
A segue.
Yeah.
What a segue, yeah. John. I like it.
I think only because I've got nothing in response to what you just said.
No, it's a mic drop.
I'm going to have to listen back to it, try and make sense of it in a day's time.
I don't understand what I said either. So I reached beyond my, I'll just go back to the vibe, man. Yeah. Okay, but let's talk about the curious chat we have on this week. All right, a little bit about our guest. Our guest's research, teaching and consulting focuses on issues of strategy, collaboration, entrepreneurship and innovation with a special interest in design thinking, emerging technologies and open innovation. Our guest was also a visiting scholar at Stanford University and Hasso Plattner Institute, School of Design Thinking at Potsdam University. Now, prior to joining the Business School at UTS in Sydney, he also taught at the UTS Schools of Design and Architecture and at Macquarie University. Our guest is a passionate educator who has taught at universities in the UK, Japan, China, the US, Germany, Netherlands, and New Zealand, to mention a few, and has also won numerous awards along the way. Now, this caught my eye, John. Some very interesting titles from co-authored papers and books. Number one, a very short, fairly interesting and reasonably cheap book about studying strategy. Number two, herding cats to co-create cross-university courses in record time. And number three, avoid being the turkey. How big data analytics changes the game of strategy in terms of ambiguity and uncertainty. Now, that's not all. Our guest was also a principal at PricewaterhouseCoopers, production engineer at Volkswagen, and a program manager at the Goethe Institute, which I hope I've said that correctly. Is also a founder of ULab, an interdisciplinary think tank and platform for innovation projects. Apart from his academic pursuits, our guest is an active member of the entrepreneurship community and has mentored and advised various startups. Please put a big round of applause together for our guest, Jochen Schweitzer.
Woohoo! Welcome. Wow.
My gosh, that sounds big.
Quite an intro.
Now,
Yeah, way too long.
Straight to it. What's caught your curious eye this week?
Oh, picking up on John's mention just there, because wanted to respond to John's curious moment there, is that I've recently read somewhere, I can't remember where, must have been in some social media feed, that someone put an additional piece of artwork into an exhibition. I think it was a trainer or a handbag or something. And it was in a space where it sort of sat alone there, and they observed how people started to gather around it and have a good look at it and trying to figure out what piece of art and how it fits into the exhibition. So I think that was a nice sort of reverse action to what John observed. Yeah.
I love it.
But my curious moment, I recently listened to an old version of a Freakonomics podcast, and it was on the praise of maintenance. And I really liked it. I'm a sort of a tinkering maintenance kind of guy, and I like fixing stuff up. And I really appreciate that perspective. And so they really made a point of the maintenance. The maintenance is underrated as a source for innovation, and maintenance being that act where you are deeply involved and engaged with how things work and why they break, and how the repair process is also, or the repair is an opportunity for making it better, and a great source for inspiration for new things and for growth. So I really love that. Started to dig into that a little bit, and really enjoyed that podcast.
And is it along the lines of also when you're working with your hands, you activate different parts of your brain as well? So when you're tinkering, would that be true?
Well, for me, absolutely. That's how I got into all of this, really.
Yeah, sure.
I'm starting to tinker.
I often say to people, like when you create a prototype, the act of actually using your hands sends new messages to your brain. And I also, when you talk to, let's say, local government as well, and you have the people who work outdoors, and they'll be like, well, I've got no interest in anything you're going to say. And you say, you're the best innovators in the world, because not in the world, but you're innovating every day because you're doing things with your hands, and you see that sort of penny start to drop. So I'm a big fan of this idea of tinkering as well to trigger new ways of thinking.
Just a follow-on question, because it is really interesting. Is it that the innovation comes because of the greater depth of understanding you have of how something is working or how something has been put together? So you take it apart and then you say that piece there or that mechanism or that process could be done better. And that presents a sort of mini innovation. Is that the concept there?
I think that's the argument. And I don't necessarily think that it's maintenance is the cause for disruptive innovation. It's probably more the cause for incremental innovation. That's how I would make sense of it. Something to need maintenance doesn't make it broken. It just means it needs to be maintained. You have to refill the oil and sort of fix the joints a little bit. But really, that engagement with the in depth with how things work and how they can break them down, pull them apart, and put them back together, I think gives you depth of understanding of how it really works and what the weak part of the thing is. And I think that's a great source for innovation. That really spoke to me. So I really think that was a good point made.
It's great. I have to say, I'm going to have to share it because it's very much of the moment. So just the weekend past, there's a little place in town across from where we live that every month has a repair cafe. And so people can come along and bring things to be repaired. Typically things like toasters or radios or sort of clocks or something like that. So we took along the toaster that wasn't working, and the chap there, he suddenly stripped it down and he sort of unveiled the inner beatings of this toaster. And both myself and my son just kind of went, "Oh wow, that's how it works." You'd see these tiny little sort of delicate copper strips where you push the handles down, and the little magnetic mechanism at the bottom that kept the toast down. Things like that. I thought it was fascinating, but it was only in that moment you go, "Oh, that's right," and then you could look at it and go, "There must be a better way of doing that." You start looking and go, "Is that it?"
No wonder my toaster doesn't work. Yeah.
So you go, "That's rubbish."
It doesn't have AI yet.
Yeah, exactly. Look, Jochen, we have people sort of listening from all over the place. Where are you in the world today? We always ask, what can you see out your window if you have one?
Oh, I have a window right next to me. You can see it too, can't you? I'm in Sydney, Australia, and it's late afternoon and the sun is shining through my window, which is lovely. And I'm looking out onto my front yard and from that onto the beautiful cafe that we have in our street, just across the street, which has brought a lot of life to our street.
I was just going to say, is that a sort of view that you find yourself drifting towards and lost in thought as you look out the window at something quite close by and lovely by your house?
It's not that kind of view where you kind of get lost in the depths of it. No, like it's pretty straightforward. Oh, the queue is short. I might go now and get my coffee.
More prosaic,
Yes.
but nonetheless useful.
Absolutely no.
On that question of coffee, has your coffee spend gone up dramatically since you have a cafe across the road?
Not so much. I've always been an avid coffee drinker. I have noted an increase in my cost of coffee once the cafe appeared across the street. So I had to sort of call that back a little bit. And I'm also using my homemade coffee a bit more again.
Now, look, speaking of food, I think this might be a nice segue, John, to what we like to call dinner party introductions. Now, you've probably been at a dinner party and you've gone there and you sat down, you don't really know anyone, and that person you sit next to is kind of a bit stale, like, "Hey, what do you do? Hello, what do you," sort of like boring questions. So John and I always thought, imagine we're having a good dinner party, what could be some questions we might ask? So let's imagine we've all sat down, we've got some, let's say, some lovely Australian wines tonight. And if we look over to the drinks cabinet, there's some really good things to get some rums to get the party going a little bit later. So it's going to be a good evening. So, Jochen, good to see you. What's giving you joy at the moment?
What's giving me joy lately is seeing my kids turning into great people. So I have a 13 and a 10-year-old. So basically a teenage daughter and a 10-year-old son. And despite all the usual tensions that happen in that phase of their and our lives, we have started to have great conversations. We can do things together differently. We go on overnight hikes, much more challenged by them and what they say than I used to be. And I observe them dealing with other adults and other children in kind ways. And that just gives me lots of joy, really. It's also, age that they are currently in is also a great source of frustration, by the way. But yeah, it's great to see them become more independent. And with that comes also, I feel, I'm getting some time back for myself. I'm getting some time back for the things that I used to do. So, and that's great. So I'm getting back into old hobbies and I really enjoy that.
There you go. There's another segue, Jochen, is what hobbies do you lose yourself in?
So we talked about it earlier. So I think the one that I lose myself in is the tinkering. I must have a list of 50 little projects that are sort of that need to get done, and a growing list of things that I need from the hardware store to get them done. But there's usually something around our place where we live. There's also always a bike to fix or an outdoor gear to mend or a surfboard to, get the wax off and get the wax on. Some climbing gear to look after. Just recently, I had to fix a fence gate. Gave me great joy. Just tinker around and I pull out the rotten wood and put some new wood in and gave it a layer of paint. Yeah, that's great. So really
You can come over to our house, actually, because I need
No,
some of your
no, 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 no.
vibes.
It
Yeah,
has to be. I'm not.
I was just thinking of my wife saying, now there's a hobby. Why don't you get a hobby like that?
yeah. Don't let her listen to this show. We're in trouble.
Yeah, but look, other than that, I mean, as I said earlier, I get some time back recently and getting back into hobbies and discovered mountain biking. I'm close to really beautiful mountain bike tracks. Yeah, I can get into that, and that's great, great, great exercise. And I come back and I'm exhausted and find my way to the couch.
Yeah, wonderful. So, given we've hearing some of those hobbies you lose yourself in, who or what is inspiring you at the moment?
Um, Not so much who. I guess it's more about what. I've always been really inspired by great talent, mostly because I think that I probably don't have much of it myself. So I really admire and am inspired by musicians, by artists, by actors, comedians, entertainers. My daughter and I will be seeing Olivia Rodrigo in Sydney when she comes to Sydney in a few
Yeah, cool,
weeks.
cool.
So I'm just looking forward to those moments. So that's always a great, great source of inspiration. And the other part to that is, I think, great ambition and passion. And again, the passion part is something that I always found difficult to identify for myself, because I've always been interested in too many things and nothing really deeply, but always been jealous of those people who, like in year 10, knew that they're going to be helicopter pilots. And they ended up being helicopter pilots, or people who wanted to become a nurse or became a nurse. So I was not that person. I was always, I don't know, I'll figure it out. And I'm still feeling a bit like that. So what inspires me is great talent, great ambition, and great passion.
Yeah, and I should probably add at that point, Jochen, is I've always wanted to be a podcast host. I knew this from the age of 8.
Well, that's cool because they don't really exist that long.
John was called a futurist.
Yeah, that was it. I knew this was
is,
coming. I knew podcasting was coming back when I was 8 years old, back in 1976. Yeah.
it's not too different to being a radio host, right? I admit I always loved listening to the radio, and I could in fact see myself in that as well. More like playing music stuff.
We're all about curiosity, obviously. And so this question is about what you're curious about right now. Or is there a big question that you're turning over in your head? Because often you meet people and they have got something they're continuously working on or wrestling with. What's that for you, Jochen?
Yeah, I think Simon introduced me extensively. So there was a couple of questions that make me curious already in there. So I think in my work, I'm really looking at that intersection of strategy, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And there's tons of questions that I'm really interested in, mostly around how organizations can drive innovation, how organizations can adopt new innovation models, how they can come to new business models. So sort of taking an organizational perspective. And that's interesting for existing corporate organizations, but just as well interesting for startups and people who are just sort of getting into this space. I'm also very interested in how entrepreneurial thinking and entrepreneurial practices stimulate innovation and strategic growth for organizations. So what are the capabilities and the mindsets underlying those activities and how they can then sort of lead to innovation and entrepreneurial success? Another question that I'm really interested in and getting more into lately is the role of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So everything that's around the entrepreneur, the various organizations, including government organizations, support structures, incubator accelerators, you name it, and how they help to foster collaboration, knowledge exchange, and then from that, how innovation entrepreneurship can grow.
As you were describing that, I noted somewhere that you, in a presentation you gave around almost the corporate mindset or corporate management, where there's reduced uncertainty and things are sort of running as they should be. Something is up and running, different to the entrepreneurial mindset or management piece. And do you cross over, or are you solely in the entrepreneurial thing? And then as things start to operationalize and systemize and get running, that your interest, you don't step into that as much, or that's still of interest and you look to the bridge between the two?
No, it's both really, because that's the corporate innovation and strategy world is more the world that I originally came from. So worked for a large strategy consulting organization, and most of those engagements were around finding new strategic opportunities for large organizations and discovering opportunities in new markets and so on. that's my kind of bread and butter that I grew up with, if you like. And over time, I got more interested in the entrepreneurial side of things, realizing that the kind of management education that is needed for one or the other actually is slightly different. There's huge overlaps, obviously, but there is differences. And I think the reason why it's important is that I think most education systems, universities in particular, business schools in particular, have for a very long time very much focused on the corporate end of management education, creating new managers who you can plug into some corporate organization and they can do their job. Because large organizations have for long times requested that we need these kind of people, and that's why business schools go and produce them. So, and then often, in many universities, I think, or educational institutions, the entrepreneurial side of things was sort of not neglected, but it wasn't paid that much attention to. So when I realized that that's really sometimes missing, I really got interested in creating those opportunities also for students.
Now, I'm going to ask a question just to wrap out our dinner party, but I've got so many more questions, which we'll get to a little bit later. How would you describe what you do? And you may have already said this. If you sit in the middle of 3 or 4 things, what are they? Just so John's getting a bit drunk, so it might be time to wrap up the dinner party. We often have to call him an Uber.
Yeah. One too many already.
He's old. He sleeps.
I'm on the toffee flavored tuaca now.
Well, let's keep it simple then. It's a Venn diagram.
Oh, we love a Venn diagram. Yeah,
we do.
I thought so. Jochen's research ikigai, the overlapping circles. Look, as I said, it's really meandering between questions around strategy, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And they're clearly related and they're clearly overlapping a lot. But if you think about a Venn diagram, then sort of where innovation and strategy overlaps, I'm looking at innovation management. How can organizations get to better innovation, to better strategic innovation? Where strategy and entrepreneurship overlap, it's mostly about business development, business growing for startups. So I'm taking a startup perspective there. And then where innovation and entrepreneurship overlap, it's for me mostly around ecosystems. And the target group, I think, of that interest, of that research is mostly governments, because those areas are a lot influenced by the governance and the systems that are in place to let innovation and entrepreneurship grow in economies.
Your ikagi, or I say ikikagi, but I'm pretty sure I've got an extra syllable in there, is intense. Yeah. I'm trying to draw it here, and it looks like a Salvador Dali painting. So, yeah. So, look, John's fallen asleep, but...
Oh, my God, I'm the worst party guest you can have.
No, he got into the creme de menthe. So I think we'll say this has been a wonderful kickoff, and we'll get John an Uber. Now, the Occupational Philosophers was born of the desire to explore the interplay between curiosity, the world of creativity, with some philosophy thrown in. And look, so that very much goes to the heart of the work that you do. So my first question is, what are the key attributes of entrepreneurialism? And I guess the reason for asking is we often hear organizations say we want to be more entrepreneurial-like, if that's the right thing to say. So what are those key attributes? And is that even the right question that we should be asking at the beginning? Is there a better question to ask that organizations may learn from, or anyone listening to the show?
It's a great question, I think. But it's a difficult one to answer in some way. Going back to that sort of conversation that we had earlier about the different kinds of management needed in an entrepreneurial environment and in a non or corporate environment, really triggered that question for me also. What is the difference then? So what are the skills and what are the capabilities that we need to develop within people so they actually become more entrepreneurial? It can be those people that you want in your corporate organization. And it's interesting that corporate organizations now increasingly sort of want those skills because they're realizing, we're lacking those skills. There's a quote by Elon Musk, I think, who said he employs MBAs not because they have an MBA, but despite of them having an MBA. It really made me think, because what is it then that he's looking for? Because the businesses, at least at that time, he was building were startups and scale-ups, and he really needed a skill set that is around having a vision and opportunity recognition, so seeing opportunities, for example. I would name that as one of the entrepreneurial attributes or distinct entrepreneurial attribute for people, because that is not necessarily something that you're being asked to do in a traditional corporate career. The next one would be around resilience and adaptability, maybe the ability to deal with failure, because entrepreneurs very early in their entrepreneurialism learn that things fail, they don't go to plan, they don't get the funding, they get it wrong, but they just keep doing it and, coming up with a new version and a new version. And over time, iteratively, they sort of get so much. You need resilience for that. And that's something that they can learn. Risk tolerance is one thing. I think often entrepreneurs, are being misunderstood for being risk takers. They're anything but. They're really great risk tolerators and risk mitigators. So they're probably a lot less risk taking than some corporate figures. And that's something that's them apart as well. Maybe two more. There's one is around resourcefulness, really sort of making something from nothing or what you have at hand. And there's a great concept around effectuation in the entrepreneurial theoretic world that sort of deals with that. If you have lemons, you make lemonade. That sort of mindset as well. And then, of course, something that is around sort of having drive and persistence and sort of keeping going and stoicism. I think I've heard you saying before somewhere. So these are the things I think that are entrepreneurial attributes. The big question, though, and then the other question that I often get is, but can this be taught? Because that is a question that always comes, and I'm always very surprised. And actually, I'm no longer surprised about it, but I'm sort of struggling with that, because why would entrepreneurship be anything different or anyhow different to any other field of knowledge that we can train and learn? We don't ask plastic surgeons. You either have a talent for it or you don't. Really, I think that's something to think about.
I guess one point there's a bit of a myth, you're born with it or you're not, like, again, which is very much in my world, are you creative or you're not, which is, I go back to that, absolutely, you can teach it. How do you teach it then? What does that look and feel like with you having done so much in this space?
I think every other learning, it's best taught while doing it. So entrepreneurship, just like creativity, I think artistic practice comes from just doing it a lot, having opportunity to do it. So entrepreneurship is a very applied science, right? It comes from, doing it and experiencing it. And that's how we learn it and that's how we teach it. So really, for me, in the programs that I have created, the courses that I teach, it's all about just doing it. You break it down into, okay, what's the task that you have to do to get in the process of being entrepreneurial? Okay, you have to find something that meets a customer's need. Okay, how do you go about it? Okay, here's 3-4 tools for you to do that. Create something, test it, get feedback, and learn from it. And so that's where you can work your way through an entrepreneurial process and an entrepreneurial experience as you go through your learning.
As you were saying that, Jochen, I noticed one of the papers, which had a simpler title, was Curiosity as a Practice. And I might touch on that later and ask about that. But again, it's quite interesting how you're breaking down things that might have an air of, not mystery around them, but might feel a bit ethereal, curiosity. To go, no, it's a practice. You can break it down into things that you do and then just practice more of doing those things. Is that again is the essence of that, isn't it? It's just taking something that might be seemingly intangible and saying, actually, you can see it in behavior and tasks and action.
That's right. I think you can break it down and you can create, for the learning part, I think you can create situations where that particular skill can be developed. And I think in the entrepreneurship space, the best way to do that is to let people build their own startup, to work on something that they are actually interested in and then they're motivated to do. If it's only for the duration of the education that they're going through, then that's okay. If it goes beyond that, then that might be even a way for them to make an extra buck somewhere or it will create value in some way.
And I love the fact you got stoicism in the conversation just a few moments ago, because that's ticked off our philosophy box.
Yeah, very much so.
Building on this, the discussion around the startups, Jochen, the research says, again, you can tell us if this is what you observe or have read around, where it says that 90% of startups eventually fail. So the 10%, what are they doing exceedingly well? What are the few things they've really managed to crack or focus on that's had them have longevity of success?
Again, great question. It's hard to say, really. So I have to answer that without being able to point you to particular research papers. So that's a bit of a swing here that I'm doing. But I think where most startups fail or succeed is actually in their ability to find a product market fit, to actually create a product, a service, or any sort of value that is actually needed and wanted by anyone else out there. That in itself is a massive task to achieve. So few entrepreneurs invent something and like from one day to the other, it's so great and it sort of just goes through the roof. That's really not the rule. The rule is a long, long process of maybe creating something that someone out there is interested in and sees value in, and maybe even willing to pay for at some point in the journey. So that combination of that market research, understanding what people want and need, and finding that opportunity, and then creating something that really meets the need and is a great fit. That's the hardest thing. That doesn't even mean yet that you have, let's say, a business model to generate revenue from that. You're still probably far away from that. You just created something that somebody else wants, where there are enough people to justify doing it. I think that's definitely one. Another thing I think where many entrepreneurs, particular first-time entrepreneurs, are often out of their depth very quickly is financial management, understanding how they can fund growth. And you might say, okay, well, they might have organic growth, so they don't take on investment, they just grow from revenue and so on, and that's great. The reality of, particularly for tech startups today, is different. It really means that at some point, and if something really has legs and you have something like product market fit, there will be people who want to support you financially, but often entrepreneurs have to learn very quickly what that actually means. That you give shares away from your business and they get diluted with every round that you're taking. So there's a lot of things to learn, and there's a lot of things you can get wrong, and often that's a critical sort of skill to have. And then as a last thing, I would think that the task of shifting from being a sole founder or small team to growing an organization is another skill. And that often only comes later in that journey, but it's a difficult one. If you have a team of 3, 4, 5 people, you work in a garage or in some space, and you tinker and you do product market fit, and you get a first round of funding, and all of a sudden you have $1 million and you can employ 3 people who will be looking after sales. And then so if you have more success and then you have another round of funding, you get some revenue, and all of a sudden there's 10, 20, 30 people. That's a different game than there is when you are just a small group of friends, basically. And that's where anything that has to do with team building, leadership, and managing organizations, that's where the dial shifts from what we talked about earlier, from an entrepreneurial management and entrepreneurial skill set to a more corporate organizational skill set, because that's when you need to know how you can lead teams, how you can put processes and governance in place to run an organization. It's a whole different ballgame. It's different, but that's also where founders often struggle. So those 3 things, it's market research and product market fit, sort of getting to that first sort of fit, knowing how to effectively use financing. And then the third one would be around leadership and team building.
That's great. And it's nice that you managed to capture that in a lovely, succinct way there, Jochen. There was one, I read something about one of the other factors that sometimes gets missed is timing. Do you see this as well? Just some of these new startups just fail because the time is wrong. And there's a degree of luck that plays into it,
yeah.
where they just go, bang, the product market fit was there, and they hit the market at the right time and off it goes. And other times, brilliant ideas.
I would agree to that. I think we often underestimate how long people have been working on some things and how long they have tinkered around. It still has to be the right moment where the things sort of come together, where they find the right market, where they find the right investment, where they are all available and capable and interested enough in pursuing this. Absolutely.
Yeah, one of our previous guests, Gemma Enright, who is now an angel investor in the startup space, but she sold her own startup, which was called Money Brilliant, and sold it to AMP. Then it got sold onto one of the banks. And one of those first personal finance platforms that goes through your bank account and says, yeah, hey, this is where you're doing well and wasting money. And apologies if I'm giving that the bad overview, but it's along those lines. And she said she thought they were about 18 months early because the market was very early. So she thought if they had in reflection, they're probably, too early to get even a better price. It just goes back to that time, even though they did that very successfully, a year along would have looked a lot different.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I mean, so many startups who are doing really great stuff, innovative, great product market fit, but really struggling with the funding that they currently have. So running out of money, basically, running out of money before they even get to a market big enough that would sustain their growth. So they have to they fold up. They say, okay, well, and if they're lucky, they can maybe sell to an investor or to a group and they get absorbed in some other tech company or another company. But yeah, that's also to the point of timing, right? You're having enough time also on your money clock to get to the next stage.
So I'm going to jump in and we're going to take the conversation slightly in a different direction. Your most recent book, which you co-authored, was called Transform with Design, Creating New Innovation Capabilities with Design Thinking, which is a term that many people may have heard of, may not understand it to its full extent. What is design thinking and why do organizations need more of it?
I'm sure this has been discussed on your show many times before. But
No, I think it's the
in
first time we've dived into the actual, what is it? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, look, so design thinking is a really interesting methodology. It's a human-centered, iterative process that combines elements of empathy, creativity, and problem solving, practical problem solving, to develop innovative solutions and address user needs. So basically, an innovation. There's kind of key characteristics to it, and I think design thinking is best known for the first publication was around 2009 by Brown around the human-centered design approach, where they basically describe this process of how you can use design methods, design mindsets to come to innovation. And initially, I think it was mostly around creating better products and services. So what other feature can I add to my product using this empathetic process of identifying user needs and then creating these opportunities. And it entered the world mostly through this very famous double diamond model, I think that you're probably both aware of, where these divergent and converging thinking phases iteratively go through. So basically, at least a first phase where you think broadly, discovering what the problem that you're trying to solve really looks like. Then you are converging towards a point where you're redefining and reframing what the problem is with that knowledge in mind. So you opened up your mind to have a big and much broader understanding of the problem space. You're looking left, right, and center. You're using empathy tools or interviewing people, observing people in situations to really broadly understand what's going on. And then you're looking at it freshly and saying, well, the problem is not this, it might be that. So you're creating other versions of what the problem actually is. And that's a very, very enlightening process because it really broadens your mind to the problem space. And then at least the second iteration, you would then go to another process of, okay, well, if this is a problem, what could be the possible solution? So again, you are diverging your thinking, you're creating lots of opportunities, so hundreds of ideas of how we can maybe solve this problem before you then go into the converging last part of the process again, where you're basically testing and iterating and validating one solution idea after the other until you find one that works and you continue to develop that. So very basic idea of how this problem-solving process could look like. And it's been quite successful, I think, in the corporate context. So there's been lots of literature and starting to look into how this can be used. And that's how I got really more interested in it, is it increasingly can also be used to improve on strategy. Applied much more broadly to not just solving problems around products and services, but increasingly complex situations. And creating strategy is a complex situation. And that's where design thinking has been increasingly used as well. The book is really interesting because we noted that organizations are still really struggling with design thinking, struggling with implementing it, using it in the organizational context. And often because it kind of collided and conflicted with the organizational culture. And it really calls, to be successful, it calls for a shift in culture, a shift in mindset. It needs to be sort of ingrained in the organization as well. So really the book then aimed to use real cases of large organizations that use design thinking over long periods of time. And we wrote up these 10 cases of 10 organizations and basically how design thinking and innovation in this organization unfolded over time. And the great thing about that is it's not beautifully describing how everything was successful. It really goes into all the different little barriers and enablers and hurdles that they have had to overcome because, that manager changed and then the funding was gone and then this happened and that happened. So it's a chronological story, basically, of each of these organizations. And we wanted to position it this way to show that it's not a straight line. It's not an easy task to implement and use design thinking in organizational contexts and transformation. It requires people to understand that it's not a straight journey. Lots of things can happen, but here are 10 stories of how large organizations sort of managed to do that.
And we'll make sure we put a link in the show notes to this. Now, just on an observation, often, because this is probably 70, 80% of my work in that sort of design and innovation space, often it might be, we want to learn design thinking, and you drill down, what do you really want? We just want better ideas. So then you sort of say, well, that's a bit of a different thing. And the thing I think, which upon reflection, often we'll get together, we'll do this brainstorm, let's say, and then we'll choose one idea and we'll launch it. I think the big aha moment that I love about this more iterative way of working, which you get used, which you're thoroughly comfortable with coming from an arts background, is, well, let's rough something up and test it. And almost like blows people's minds when they go, we learn all these things we didn't know. And I go, yeah, of course, how, myself included, how can you know everything? So the moment you start to test an idea, that's what I love about that very iterative way of working. Test early, test often, great things come back from that. So that's more a statement than a question. So I guess that's the bit rusty. Yeah.
But that's also what organizations are struggling with. That's where design thinking or an innovation mindset sort of hits organizational culture. That is not usually encouraging the testing and the tinkering and the accepting that, okay, that was a bad mistake, or that didn't work. Okay, let's try something else, right? So corporate organizations, they look for business cases. They look, you want this? Okay, tell me why. How does the bottom line, what does it make me in the end? What's my return on investment? It's really hard to argue that for a method that's built on the idea that, well, you have to accept that some things we're trying here won't work. But at least we've learned that.
The way I like to think about it when we're talking about this whole edition of fail fast, I say experiment quickly. And if you want to think around, there's a really good time to fail and there's a really bad time to fail. The good time to fail is when we're just testing our ideas and they've taken us 10, 15 minutes to put together. That's a great time. Where we don't want to be failing is, hey, we've launched, we've ignored the early stuff, we have one big fail. So I guess that's why I try and sort of frame it. Yeah, there's good and bad times for things not to work out.
It's also around the testing of ideas. You don't need very high resolution prototypes and tests. You can really test an idea very quickly by just, creating something that represents the idea. And if it's a drawing, 2 boxes in a circle connected with an arrow, and you then quickly grab the phone and explain that to the person that you think needs to give you feedback on that, then that's so quickly done. And we do that in workshops and we do that in working with organizations where we just do exactly that. Sort of, you have an idea. Okay, well, who do you need to ask to get feedback on the idea, whether it's good or not? Okay, where's your phone? Call that person.
Yeah.
So, and there's something not dissimilar to the idea of thought experiments. If something is a bit more intangible, to explore it, to follow something through, as you might do with a thought experiment, to explore an idea or potential solutions, then what follows if we do go this way, and to see how you might simulate it almost intangibly in the mind and see what emerges. Then you go, we won't go that way. Actually,
well, that's a great segue, John, but you're one question early. So,
I'm one question early. My last question, I was going off on a tangent there. Jochen, my last question is, I noticed that you explore transdisciplinary innovation. More notably, I saw you attended a recent talk, I think might have even been the last day or so, at UTS on the industrial metaverse and the future of work. So I have a very quick question, which is, what is the industrial metaverse, and can I reach it on a number 47 bus?
Okay, it's time for a thought experiment. And thought experiments, as you may know, as we've mentioned before, things that philosophers have been doing since the beginning of this movement to take the brain to new places, explore big questions, ponder what might be, what might not be. So we have a thought experiment today. Some people have sometimes cruelly labelled ours as cheap 70s imitation game shows, which we find a little harsh. However, we are going to introduce our thought experiment, which is called Ferret or Fantasy, the Startup World Animal Kingdom. So in this thought experiment, as I was diving into the world of entrepreneurial startups, I realized there's a whole menagerie of animals that people get labeled. Obviously, most people understand the concept of unicorn. So what we're going to do is introduce some animals from the world of startups. Your role is to tell us if it's true or not. And so that's one point. And then if you can guess what it actually is, that's another point as well. So we're going to kick this off. And if it's true, you say ferret. If you think it's not true, you say fantasy. All right, let's kick this off and see how we go. Ferret or fantasy, the startup world animal kingdom. Okay, zebra.
Ferret?
Ferret, correct. It is. This is true. Now, point. You get an extra point.
What is the zebra?
Well, do you want to have a guess? So it is a true animal from the startup kingdom.
Zebra. You actually found some people saying,
true,
using zebra for something in the startup world. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. This is the zebra company.
I want the point though.
You get a point. Absolutely. The zebra company, one that is both black and white, that equally stands for improving society and profit. So you're a zebra startup.
You made that up.
This must be, I guess, like a social enterprise or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
A zebra. Okay. All right.
I haven't made these up, but I've only recently discovered them. So let's say that. John, you go next.
Okay. So beaver.
Fantasy.
It is a ferret. It is true. So I'm guessing you'd have no idea what typifies or characterizes a beaver startup in the animal kingdom world of startups. Beavers impose an ecosystem. They want it all. They come into an area, take down the trees, completely transform their habitat to meet their needs. Beavers are successful in their own way and famously resourceful. But they thrive by dominating an ecosystem and compelling everything else to adapt. The biggest telco/banks in the country are beavers, trying to lock you in to long-term contracts. There we go. I'll never look at my bank again the same way.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Hey, you beaver. Let's go to our third one. Orangutan. Is this ferret or fantasy?
That's a ferret.
Well, I'm sad to say this is a fantasy. So,
I just got nothing right here.
From the mind of Simon Banks. But I thought, if this was a startup, the orangutan would swing into the business world with big ideas, but a bit of a messy direction. Known for its wild creativity and resourcefulness, it often disrupts in expected ways. May take a while to pivot, but once it finds its swing, it's tough to beat. So that was
right turn,
if it was.
Love it.
All right, John, you
quickly moving on. Camel.
Camel. Well, camel is clearly a fantasy.
It's a ferret. It's true. Wow, this is a humdinger of a difficult quiz here, Simon.
It is. So,
isn't it? Right. So camel, these are creatures that depend less on venture capital to survive. They may raise a few smaller rounds to get going, but can survive longer periods in the desert of cash-strapped markets. It's when you read them out, you go, that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
it's quite a good analogy, isn't it? It's quite good.
It is. Okay, that's our next
I'm quite embarrassed, actually.
We'll do a couple more.
You'll be furiously researching after this, won't you, Jochen? You'll be there going, oh my God, I've got to find out more about this.
All right. Donkey. Is this ferret or fantasy?
Donkey.
Can't Google.
At this stage, I'm guessing. It's a ferret.
That is correct. A donkey is an overvalued unicorn. It's a startup that's achieved a sky-high valuation and great numbers on one metric, i.e. customer growth, but which is struggling on some other important metrics. So that is a donkey. So that's true. You've come good. Now, John, we've got maybe just choose one of those last couple.
I'll go last one. All right, I'll do it. Yeah.
Okay.
So, Wookiee.
From Star Wars. Like
a Wookiee. Oh, I hope it's a ferret, but I say it's fantasy.
It is fantasy. Well done. What a good one to finish on there. But if it were true, in Simon's mind, it's valued at a hefty $300 million. Wookiee startups are all about brute force market entry. Their strategy is to growl first and ask questions later. And while their methods might seem a bit unrefined, Wookiees build fiercely loyal teams, can scare off the competitors just by showing up. Not the fastest, but when they finally launch, the competition is left in the dust. There we go. That's the Wookiee.
Wonderful. There's clearly a book in this.
Now, I just want to note, I've scrolled the internet for these. So there should be some references which should go against these. There's not going to be, but the false ones are my thinking. The other ones belong to other people. So that was today's thought experiment. Ferret or fantasy, the startup world, animal kingdom. Okay, so now we're going to have our fast and challenging section, and we'd like to dive into our not so serious business podcast advice, even though pretty much all of this is business podcast advice. Let's say you're a solopreneur. We all think our ideas are awesome, but how do you spot an opportunity? Where should you be looking?
I got two good ones here. And I think because one, I was told some long time ago by Richard Seymour, founder of Seymour Powell, the London design strategy organization. And he said, and I've been using it ever since, and that's been since 2013 or something, you start with what pisses you off. That's a great way to sort of find something that's not right. And if it's the seal of the peas in your freezer that are going around and you have to invent something to make that go away, then that's a great way to start. So what pisses you off is a great first question. And I often use that with students when they're kind of lacking ideas of, I'll do a startup, I don't know what to do. Well, then, pick something that pisses you off. I love that.
Yeah.
The other one is, and I also take that from Alan Watts, and we're back to philosophy, good old philosopher who had a lecture once, which I came across years ago, about what do you desire and what makes you itch. Wonderful lesson, really more about what you should do with your life and that you should pick something that you're passionate about. But I also think that's a great question for someone to start thinking about what they want to do. So the combination of what pisses you off and what do you really want to do, I think is a great starting point for solopreneurs.
Moving on to teams, Jochen. We mentioned earlier curiosity as a practice, and that's an area I'm really fascinated by. How might teams begin to apply that idea of curiosity as a practice? You do mention in the abstract about there's different practices, socio-materiality, discursivity, and agency. But do you just want to sort of unpick that a little, just in simple terms, what a team can do if they're sat in an organization, maybe?
So maybe a bit of background to that study. So that was the PhD study of David Bickett, one of my PhD students some years ago, who conducted that study. And he was mostly interested in the role of curiosity in the boardroom. So around board members and CEOs, what role does curiosity actually play? And we really found some interesting things. And he really found that it doesn't really have a great place in the boardroom. And whenever it is evident, then it creates the opportunity for a deeper look, for a look around the corner. So when board members have demonstrated or sort of shown that they are curious to hear more and to give it some time to explore options before they come to decide something about the future of the organization, then that had been really good, but it had been difficult to get that accepted around the organization. What David took from those insights is really identify the power of curiosity in that decision-making process, in that sort of corporate governance context, and that it really is a practice that needs to be practiced to be effective, and it needs to be present for those moments to exist where conclusions are being questioned and someone can actually say, look, that's a great solution, but what else can we do? Where else can we look? Because that requires usually, a little extra time, a little extra funding. And for that to happen at that kind of level of decision making is quite rare to find.
Yeah, which would be one of the things that I often caught and was a precursor, I think, to us coming together on this podcast, was recognizing sometimes that those conversations where questions were sort of dominant in those team forums was sadly lacking.
Well, that might do a nice little segue, John, into this. We like to think through a leadership lens. One of your co-authored papers was called Curiosity in Leadership, a Strategic Paradox. Can you talk to that paradox, or have you just talked about that paradox with us?
Kind of just talked about, because the paradox really is, because that relates to the same study and to the same paper. The paradox really is that on the one hand, boards and decision makers need to decide about the future of the company and align directions and strategies with the strategy and the vision of the organization. On the other hand, they really need to balance that with the need for innovating and the need for finding new market opportunities or doing things differently to also strategically differentiate themselves in the market. And that's a paradox, because the curiosity really obviously plays into the innovation part, whereas not asking for that curious investigation into something new plays into the sort of the risk aversion or the safe part of steering organizations. And that's a paradox that executives or leaders in organizations have to manage. That's often not explained through a curiosity lens, or at least that sort of is also the novelty of this particular study.
Does that mean then, both for what we've discussed about teams, Jochen, and then to leadership? So how might a leader hold that space open for curiosity? Is it just to say, hey guys, slow down, we need to ask ourselves what else? Or we need to set aside time to say, we're not going to come to a decision. This is going to be a discussion which explores options, and make it very explicit. Is it just about making it explicit?
Yeah, so it is often just as simple as that, I would think, because what we observed there is that in those board meetings where decisions were being discussed and risks were being rated and budgets were being established, some executives in that context would ask those questions and sort of be open to not yet make the decision, but look a little further. So displaying curiosity for more in that sense. It doesn't always necessarily have to do with innovation or with sort of finding new and better ways. It just has to do with digging a little deeper and really find me the evidence for that. I don't believe that yet. That's not enough data. Have you spoken to customers about this? So these questions are those that indicate curiosity. What else is out there that we need to consider? An openness to exploring that further, and then sort of not deciding until maybe that has been done. And that's sort of a display of curiosity in the boardroom. It also gets sort of tied up in what we have to make a decision, we have to come back to the CEO with what we're going to do. We have to employ that person or that person. It's difficult, and it's a balancing act for executives and leadership teams to make room for curiosity. And they would never call it that. Obviously, it's a theoretical construct. But to have, we believe that having more of it and practicing it as an executive or as a leader is good. It's good for business.
I must say that we've just got another hashtag, Simon. I'm going to get it on a t-shirt. Hashtag look around the corner. Just to finish up, we let people know that you were going to be sort of guesting on the show. We always ask for questions from listeners just to sort of send those in, and I've asked you something directly. So we'll just go into the mailbag here and pull some of these ones out. Here we go. It's the first one here. This is Stuart Pickleworth. He's from Henley by Thames in England. He says, Jochen, after hearing about your record-breaking bungee jump, I can't help but reflect that going to the supermarket is my biggest weekly thrill. How do I go from boring to bungee in my own adventures? Should I just jump off a chair to start with?
Is this right?
I think he's got you mixed up, hasn't he?
Is there another?
He's got me mixed up, clearly.
Yeah. There is a Jochen Schweitzer who's a pioneer of extreme sports and bungee jumping in Germany.
Right.
Oh, God.
No. Every time
I tell you, do you want a little anecdote on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey,
Oh,
yeah, we've got a few more questions. Yeah.
Instead of the answer, which I cannot answer. But because that Jochen Schweitzer has the same name, he doesn't spell his last
Yeah.
name with a TZ
Uh-huh.
like this. But anyway,
That's
it's
it.
close
Yeah.
enough, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So he became quite famous in Germany over the last 20 years. Ever since I lived in Australia, basically, he took Germany. But whenever I return to Germany, I've over the years increasingly noticed that people look at my passport and look at my name and look at my face, and I think, "Are you Jochen Schweitzer?" And yeah, it's in my passport. And I think he's well liked. He's an adventure guy. He's on television. He does a startup, like a think tank, not think tank, a Shark Tank kind of show in Germany. So he's also in that space, and he has no hair and a beard. So anyway, so the best thing that ever happened to me was that a car rental company in Düsseldorf coming into Germany, go to my parents' place, and wanted to pick up my medium-sized car that I had ordered. And the lady looks at me and thinks, "Oh, you're Jochen Schweitzer. I'll have something for you." And I got a beautiful BMW for no
I love
extra
it.
cost. So thank you, Jochen Schweitzer.
Okay, well, any suggestions? Should he just start jumping off a chair, or what are your thoughts?
Risk-taking, iteration and experimentation. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I can recommend that.
Okay, well, we've got some more here. I'm not sure. Maybe you can give some thoughts here. This is from Hildeberg Doppelbock from Berlin in Germany. I'm not sure that sounds like an unusual name, but I don't understand my German name. So I recently visited your Munich Experience Center and tried indoor surfing. The picture you advertised shows someone ripping it on waves and laughing. I couldn't stand up and everyone laughed at me, including my whole family. Can I have a refund? This is false advertising.
I can't believe another listener's got you mixed up again. Isn't that mad?
Any thoughts for that? If you were Jochen, what would you say? Yeah.
Of course.
We have not made these questions up, Jochen. They are genuinely from listeners.
Do you get them on the webpage, or do they?
People send them in by post.
Yeah.
John, let maybe do the last one. We do ask our EA to sort them.
We're going to have words. I mean, this is just shocking again. I can't believe it. The last question here for Maria Acosta Gomez. She's 85. Don't know why she's aging there. It's nice to have an older listener, isn't it, Simon?
It is, actually. It's good.
She's from Catalonia in Spain. She said, "What was it like to meet a real James Bond in your movie, Fire, Ice and Dynamite? Was he jealous that you did your own stunts? I bet he was, the loser. I love you. Will you marry me? Por favor." There we go. That's
well, Jochen, we give some hope to Maria.
85. Absolutely, yes.
Maria, so if you're listening to this,
thanks.
That's pretty good.
Obviously, apologies, Jochen, that everyone got you mixed up, but there you go.
That shows how well liked this name is.
I think it says something to the quality of our listeners, Jochen. They're just, I don't know.
In Spain, Germany, and Henley by 10.
Okay, this is a rapid fire round to wrap up, Jochen. And so let me just kick things off. What is one thing you couldn't do without in your life right at the moment?
If I'm honest, I'm saying ChatGPT. If I'm thinking about it, I'm loving my fitness tracker.
All right, very nice. Now, we are building the Occupational Philosophers Manifesto, and you might see what we've done there. What one thing of all your learning do you think should be included?
Find your tribe, find your network, and maintain it.
Are there any books we should be reading right now, which could include, obviously, your own, but anything that's caught your eye that we should pick up?
What are books?
Old school. Yeah.
No, I'm guilty as charged. I read a lot every day, but I hardly go to books at the moment. It's been a while that I read fiction. So I listen to podcasts. I love listening to podcasts and being able to do something while I'm listening to something. I do listen to Acquired, which is a great podcast that sort of looks at the becoming of now big organizations. So looking at NVIDIA, for example, or Microsoft or other organizations. So that's a great podcast to listen to, well-researched. I listen to Pivot. Pivot is a New York Times podcast, contemporary topics, anything quite interesting. And I love Search Engine. Search Engine is by some of the people who originally did the Reply All podcast some years ago. You might know that. There's some interesting stuff in there. And there's some German podcasts that I really love. More for the German listeners.
And of course, the Occupational Philosophers, we'll just add that in.
And of course, the Occupational Philosophers.
I hope that wasn't a little dig
as well.
That was, they're well researched. I thought maybe it was a little bit of our letters to the editor, but we'll let that slide. Now, just a matter, our last question. I think that'll be. So. Okay, last question. Many years from now, you've decided you no longer want to work. You're in very much the latter years of your life. You're taken to your retirement home. You're taken into the dining room. Everyone turns around expectantly. They go to introduce you and they say, "Here's Jochen. How would you like to be introduced?"
I think I'd change my name. So it'll be, "Here's John. He's the new handyman."
Oh, I like it. Maybe changing your name, because I noticed we've said it slightly differently about 35 times. Our apologies. All right. Now, what are you up to next? Well, you've got so many things on. What's maybe a project or a research what are you up to next in the next sort of 12 months?
Next 12 months, yeah. Oh, lots of stuff, really. So there is always teaching to prepare. There's always research project. We have a couple of grant applications, as we do as academics. We apply for big grants and we hardly ever get them. But if we do, then we're really busy. So we've done that recently, particularly in the area of sort of ecosystem research, innovation ecosystems. So I'm really looking forward to some of those outcomes. Only 2 of those come through, then I'll be very busy with that. And then, of course, it's now towards the end of the year, there's a bit more time to get back into the writing. So I have a few writing projects that I'm trying to tie up and get done over the next couple of months. And that's the plan.
Excellent. And where can we find you, Jochen? Connect with you, find you online, buy you drinks, whatever it is? How do we find you?
Yeah, buy me drinks anytime. I'm fairly present on LinkedIn. So I use that a lot to talk about what I do and sort of to comment on what other people do. But also, other than that, my email address is on the UTS webpage, the University of Technology, Sydney. And you can find me there and just contact me directly via email.
Excellent.
And probably your doppelganger in Germany will be getting all these emails. "Hey, I really like that research around design thinking." What?
You should really make sure that those questions are directed to him now.
I tell you what, it'd be great if we could get him on.
Yeah.
And we'll do a similar thing to him. Yeah. In your paper, Curiosity and the Leader. What?
I think that would be awesome if you get him on. It'd be awesome.
Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. And look, I've been probably tapping away at this for about the last 18 months saying, "Hey, do you want to come on our show?" And yeah, thank you so much. But again, all our guests, you just learn so much. And for me, I thought there's so many little sound bites here I'm going to drop in. I've got a program next Tuesday and I'll be able to drop all of these in. So thank you so much for your great energy, good sense of humor, and rocking up with us on a Thursday evening when the sun is starting to set. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jochen. And
thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Real pleasure. Thank you.
John, as usual, what an amazing guest. And look, given we had such a lengthy chat, let's jump straight to it. What a couple takeouts for you from all of that awesome content.
Well, I really loved hearing more about his thoughts onto the topic of entrepreneurialism and the kind of mindset, the attributes question that kicked off. Encapsulated it really well. I mean, he said there was kind of 5 key attributes as he saw it. One was just that ability to see opportunities, to spot where there might be a sort of something interesting to pursue, married with that ability to deal with failure. He termed it as resilience. And again, that makes sense because you've got to get into that mode of experimentation in that kind of field. Risk tolerance. And it was interesting how he described that, because he's right. I think that the thought that you often have is that entrepreneurs have a sort of cavalier attitude to risk, and it's not that at all. They've just managed to think about it in a slightly different way and can tolerate it in a slightly different way and can mitigate it. So that was really good. Resourcefulness, again, makes sense. I wouldn't have thought of it myself, to him to just go, look, they're able to, from nothing, start to do a bit of alchemy and produce something that is often quite magical, or just keep something moving. And then drive, persistence, and stoicism, which is that ability to dig in when the going gets tough. So I thought that was great. And then in the latter part, there was just some lovely things around curiosity into the boardroom, framed as looking around the corner. As I said, that's definitely a hashtag for me. And then with startups, with where do the ideas come from, as he quoted Richard Seymour, start with what pisses you off or is giving you the itch. So you go, well, God, I've got a load of ideas.
Now, I like this because in previous lifetimes, people said, we want to learn creative problem solving or something along those lines. In a previous life, I said, we'll just rock up and do it. Now I'm always like, well, what's the question you want to solve before? But you go into the room and say, okay, what do we like to be more creative about? Everyone's, I don't know. What pisses you off? Hey, everyone's got like a list, and that's exactly the same thing. What pisses you off? Well, that's something we can apply what we're going to do. Now I'll jump into mine. I love just learn by doing. And I think he called it applied science, if I've got that right. So just do it, okay? And again, just get stuck in. I love this. Every idea is in the discovery phase. So you're just looking for opportunities. Yes, to be open. You don't know what they are. Don't rush to solutions. Be open what the opportunities are.
Yeah.
And then which is so simple, test those opportunities, find out one that works.
Yes.
It seems so simple. Just when you get into that headspace, you can test early, test often. I think that's a lovely little thing to do. And Mike Parsons, who's been a previous guest, said once you get into it, you just go, how do you know it's good? Test it. Becomes quite simple.
Yeah, because I think as well as people often rushing to the solution, even if you manage to draw them back and get them to redefine the problem better, they then, when they come to a solution, can charge ahead and go, oh, that's the one, and just go from there. And you go, no, you need to hold that sort of curiosity and that sort of desire to iterate still front of mind, even when you're in solution mode.
So much good stuff, though. So much good stuff. But look, let's wrap up this, which I think has been a wonderful show with a wonderful guest. As always, if you've liked the show, tell your friends. You can connect with us. Go to the Occupational Philosophers. All our details are there. If you think, oh, I'd like to work with John or Simon or both of them, all the details are there as well. So you can come over and check out the other things we get up to. And I think that's about it, John. So look, as always, what do we like to say?
Stay curious, make stuff, have fun, play more, and
most importantly, each and every day, get out there and date life.